Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be my review, in-depth breakdown for Netflix Avatar Episode 6, N106 Masks. So, yeah, getting straight into it, like I've said a few times now already, this is in my top 3 episodes. I make a distinction between, I think, the top 3 and then the bottom 5, in terms of like the ones that I feel are 3 higher quality episodes and then ones that are much more mixed. I think would maintain that I think the first episode is still the best episode, but I think this solidly slots in at number 2. With N102 being the third best episode. Obviously the big thing with this one is that it gets to tell Zuko's backstory, so that is big, notable, interesting content that is kind of very difficult to get wrong. It's just getting the chance to tell the story of how Zuko got his scar and revealing this kind of notable kind of different side to him to show how much he has changed, basically just because of this one major event. That's a huge thing that this episode gets a chance to do, but it does have to sort of be noted that the whole episode isn't just Zuko's backstory. There's a lot of other stuff that happens in it as well, and some of that stuff doesn't work maybe as perfectly well, because like it obviously gets the benefit of doing one of the best kind of additions to the show, and that is the whole 41st Division reveal and the slightly different way they do it here compared to the original, obviously, in terms of how they use this. So that's cool. But then the other side of the episode is that it is this really, really fast-paced, like in some places too fast-paced episode, in terms of like the Fire Temple sequence is rushed. It's really, really rushed, and there's no time to breathe at all. The wrap-up of the Aang plot at the end of the episode is so fast, and it's like, whoa, slow it down a little bit, because we also have to do the Blue Spirit in this episode, and have that whole episode here. And it gets to a little bit of the question about the assignment of time in this episode. And I think there are a couple of scenes that are maybe a little bit unnecessarily long. One main scene that I'll get to that I think is way too long, and these other scenes could have used just a little bit more. And this is just the idea that you have to acknowledge that this episode is still the part 2 to episode 5, and so that Aang side of the story still needs to get resolved. And while it's maybe a little bit better because you get Roku, there's still issues there. So let's get into the recap. So we of course open up with flashback younger Zuko with no scar. This is him of course preparing for his first War Council meeting. Iroh, nice scene, he helps him to look presentable, and then Iroh suggests, of course, that you just observe, don't present your own opinions. While you may think, and Ozai may say, that he appreciates other opinions, he doesn't really. That's the idea there overall. G does get a chance to shine a little bit more in this episode, so we find out that, of course, G has taken them off course. This is some of just the plotting type stuff coming into play. This is Zhao post-promotion, taking over control basically of Zuko's ship and his crew. He's in charge now, and he's like, hey, you know, you just stay here. I can't like arrest you basically as admiral, but I can take your crew from you. And so we just get Zuko being like, hey, you're loyal to me, right? You know, get back on track. But G is like, no, I'm following the order of the kind of commanding officer Zhao. Iroh does it when Zuko storms out. Iroh's like, hey, you guys need to kind of reassess where your loyalties lie, because like you don't actually know the full situation here. But you do get G kind of responding and being like, hey, it's been tough, like we've been here all this time, but you know, he says Zuko knows nothing of sacrifice. He is not the crew's prince. They don't view him really in that way. And Iroh just says that, you know, Zuko has these rough edges, but he has been through a lot, and he knows more about sacrifice than G can ever know. And so this is the big setup here in terms of like, this is actually pretty nicely done. They're not doing the whole fishing aspect of the storm, of like the crew being out at sea as the storm comes in, but they're doing the takeaway of, this is finally the crew feeling like they need to speak their mind about Zuko's behavior effectively. So they still hit the point from the storm pretty nicely here overall. So Then we get the rush stuff, like I said. So we just arrive, and Aang is here. He's already here. We saw this in the last episode. He's here on Crescent Island, and we just quickly get this idea. He lands. He walks inside. He's like, "Hey, sages, I'm here. Are you gonna help me?" Oh no, they're attacking me. Runs down the corridor. One of the other sages grabs him. This is Shayu, of course, and is like, "Hey, I can guide you to where Roku's shrine is." And it's like, whoa, take a breath here, episode, because this is a important location. There's some interesting stuff with the sages you could spend, I think, a little bit more time on. We're building up to what is like your major mid-season finale moment from the original, of course, Aang finally getting to speak to a past avatar. Admittedly, obviously in this version of the show, it's his second past avatar, but it's still very important that he get to talk to Roku. There is a slight cut in the scene at this point just to get the idea that June is on Aang's trail. Nyla has Aang's scent, of course. Then we get into the actual kind of main scene itself. So they do eventually introduce the idea that this character is Fire Sage Shayu. The Avatar relics in the past are kind of cool. But for the most part, the main things is basically just the Mother of Faces totem and Karuk's dagger. They're the main sort of notable ones in the background. We do get the Great Sage here, who has a couple of scenes in the show. They roughly present the information that's kind of present of like, okay, presently the other sages basically support the Fire Lord as being their spiritual leader, as the leader of the nation, whereas Shayu, still kind of based on what his grandfather was like, still believes that the sages specifically should always support the Avatar, and that's why he's helping Aang here. So yeah, Aang's going to contact Roku. Shayu will hold the other sages off outside, of course, and he just tried to make them see sense as the kind of attack comes in, but he talks about, the nations and the Avatar, that like we've taken a wrong path. They of course refuse to listen. They're just like, you're a traitor. And so it seems like Shayu is about to get killed here, but of course this is where it's important to remember this is in play as well. So yeah, this is immediately as Aang makes contact with Roku. They do have the line of just like, you have no idea how powerful that boy will become, but it's like, you don't give Aang an Avatar State Roku moment like they do in the show. So that line would have fit if there was a more of a sense of people trying to stop Aang getting to Kyoshi, but that doesn't really happen. So there's a few lines like that where it does feel like, you have that here, but that doesn't necessarily fit as such with what they're trying to do here. But anyway, then we finally get Roku. So obviously, up to now, it has been noted that effectively Kyoshi has taken all of Roku's scenes, but finally he gets his chance to shine here. So what's he like? He gets to show a bit of personality here. He's like, acts all serious and harsh, kind of trying to mimic Kyoshi, but actually he's just joking and purposefully tries to come across as very different to Kyoshi. So I think it's a fun enough portrayal to get across the idea that, hey, I am very different to Kyoshi. We all are. Because of course, Roku had to deal with Kyoshi as his like first in line past avatar. So he knows exactly what she's like, of course, that, she can be quite harsh and blunt with her advice. Aang makes the comment, but all the avatars, shouldn't we all kind of be the same in a way? But no, we are all individuals. Roku uses the whole idea of our spark is the same, but we all always end up as different individuals, of course. His contrast to Kyoshi's advice is that yes, force, being a warrior, is needed at times, but being a diplomat is also key. And it's like the idea that like they try their best to solve things without needing violence, but sometimes the consequences are extremely high and harsh if you try diplomacy and it fails. And there's a few times here where there's clear allusions to Roku, where he's clearly talking about like how the war started, Sozin, but they never quite say it. And I find it to be a very weird situation here that like they're bringing stuff from future content like forward, like quite heavily. So the decision to purposefully like actually not explain any of this stuff with Roku here like at all is a bit of a weird one where like, oh no, we're actually going to hold back on the Roku Sozin reveal That's just, I find it to be a little bit weird because you have Sozin already. Why not do this, is the idea, obviously. And then, of course, Aang asks about Ko, which is why he's here. And Roku's immediately like, yeah, about that. I don't really want to talk about that. But we get the whole idea. Yeah, Roku, of course, warns Aang about dealing with Ko. Avatars have suffered at the hands of Ko in the past, like Avatar Karuk gets specifically referenced here because Karuk wasn't brought up in the previous episode. If you knew, you knew, but here's the connection finally that, like, that woman's face relates to Avatar Karuk, basically, that whole idea. So yeah, Aang asks, hey, you bested Ko, how did that work? And Roku's like, I didn't defeat him, I took something from him, a totem that represents what Ko needs and Ko cannot forget, a pendant or totem of the Mother of Faces, who is actually a spirit and also Ko's mother. So that's a big reveal here. This is obviously bringing up information we found out in the Search comic. Definitely read that if you haven't read it, of course. And it makes sense, I think, to bring this up in terms of explaining Ko's actions. The face stealer is the son of the spirit that basically creates faces and creates identity. So there's an interesting idea there. And just this idea that he needs this representation of his mother. He can never forget about, his mother, that whole idea. It's an interesting concept. Wish they maybe had a little bit more time to explore it properly, but we'll get to why that gets resolved so quickly at the end, I suppose. So the idea here is, of course, Aang can trade this item back to Ko for his friend's safety, because this is an item that Ko actually really, really, really wants. Roku then gives him this line, which is kind of interesting. It's building up to the finale, because Karuk is, of course, going to take a similar approach with Aang. This isn't the best arc in the show at all, just because, at least to me, one of the big things with the avatars should, to me, always be that they are relatively positive about their team avatars. Unless something was absolutely disastrous, I think the avatars should be pretty positive about team avatars. That just feels like a series staple style idea. So the characters, the avatars basically telling him to, don't really involve your friends or count on your friends is a weird approach to take. Admittedly, in this case, Roku just is like, hey, your friends could be a liability. The Avatar has to make tough choices and you have to place the world's needs ahead of your own. And obviously there's a little bit of setup here when it comes to like the book 2 finale type stuff here in terms of like, oh yeah, like, your friends can be used against you type situation. And again, it's another situation of like, who's the main friend we know about for Roku? It's, of course, Sozin. But interestingly, in this version of the show as well, Gyatso is obviously a close friend of Roku. That connection isn't brought up either. So I'm guessing they've obviously made a decision to hold back on that stuff to actually do as a Roku backstory, how the war started type situation. They're probably going to do that probably in full. Potentially, I'd maybe assume that they might do this as some sort of a book 3 opening kind of movie style thing along the lines of how they did the Air Nomad genocide. That would be a kind of interesting way to open up season 3 to finally explain the war starting. Otherwise, it just feels weird that you specifically didn't mention it here. But anyway, okay showing for Roku. I'm glad that they came up with something significant for him to do. Having him also be an avatar who clashed with Ko is kind of interesting. But you can see it's definitely this case of, because you did the stuff with Kyoshi first, you took away Roku's stuff. So then you had to add this extra bit on for Roku to deal with. But they basically gave Karuk stuff to Roku. And then Karuk is left as like, okay, we're in the Water Tribe. You also have issues with Ko, but Ko has been dealt with so far in live action, and so Karuk is going to present some different topics. And it's just this idea of each time they move the information forward, it requires them to create another plot point, and they're not as strong as like the original plot point. The Karuk knife, of course, as we'll get to, being a particularly like, plot point, as we'll get to. But anyway, outside, Aang walks outside. Of course, everyone's on the ground, and it's like, whoa, Shayu's either incredible and took everyone out, or something different is going on here. But of course, it is June and Nyla who are here. I like this shot here showing what kind of Nyla's sort of smell vision looks like in the live action. It's actually kind of cool looking. But yeah, Aang gets hit with the tongue. He's paralyzed, and this is how June captures Aang. Next, we get a scene with June and Aang talking. There's nothing super significant here, just getting across the idea that June doesn't particularly care about the politics of the world. She's kind of like, I can survive regardless of like who's in power, basically. So the Fire Nation looks like they're going to do okay, so I don't mind like assisting things in that way. Like, she will be okay with whatever way things go. Like, she's not going to be convinced by Aang basically pointing out the idea that if you let me go, it'll be a really good thing for you. So, you know, the performance is nice, but it's clear, like, okay, we just needed you to hunt down Aang, and you've done that. Thank you, June. So yeah, she does hand Aang over to Zuko, and then we get the build up to the flashback stuff here. So, what we get here is an interesting little back and forth between Aang and Zuko, just Aang talking about, hey, my friends' lives are on the line here. I need to go and save them. I'll actually come right back to you if you let me go. Do you know what it's like to have people's lives in your hand? Zuko actually finally answers and says, like, I do, but he won't let Aang go. And so Aang asks the question, like, you couldn't have always been like this. What happened to you? And obviously this is referencing the idea of whose lives has he had in his hands. It's referencing what happens at the kind of war meeting, as well as the idea of, like, he is the commander of his ship. His crew's lives are in his hands. He does know what this is like. So this is what we get at the big war meeting scene here, of course. So, as expected, it's pretty accurate up until, like, of later on we kind of get the bigger reveal. This scene, though, is very, very, like, in general accurate. Obviously here we more see, you know, Ozai actually there, and he gets to actually say stuff, and they add in this bit of, like, hey, Ozai asks for Zuko's specific advice about how would you break through here? And of course, Ozai dismisses all of Zuko's ideas because Zuko, you know, is new to this. He doesn't have the perfect military ideas. But this is where we settle on the idea of the general decides that, hey, we'll create an opening by sacrificing, just sending a division of new recruits in to be slaughtered, and we'll kind of capitalize on that. And of course, Zuko hates this idea because Zuko is compassionate. That's the big thing that they create here is, of course, Zuko in the past is quite compassionate. And as implied by certain lines of dialogue here, it's because of his mother, it seems like that this is primarily the case. We get the whole idea sacrifice is a part of war. And so, yes, he decides that, yes, the 41st Division will be sacrificed. This is what you need to learn, Zuko. But Zuko stands up to the general and criticizes the idea. And of course, Ozai demands an Agni Kai, with the idea being that, like, there's clear tension between these two. Everyone you think feels that it's going to be between these two, and Zuko feels that he actually can stand up against this. He kind of, as a future leader of the Fire Nation, he feels like he needs to stand up against these sort of tactics. But of course, it changes because it's actually Ozai who wants to teach Zuko a lesson here. So, you know, very well done and very accurate stuff there. Very much appreciate that. Then we get the scene of Zhao coming in and just taking Aang into his custody. You know, this is where it's revealed, of course, he has the Yuyan archers. They're a major threat. He does mention that, you know, hey, I'm taking him to the Pohai stronghold. And there's the setup on, like, Iroh's part that, hey, that fortress is impenetrable. The Avatar is lost for now. But there's the clear idea, as you can see here. Zuko is smoldering with anger here. He needs to act now. He knows that if he waits on this, the Avatar will be kind of lost to him forever. Because, of course, Zhao is going to get Aang to Ozai as soon as possible, basically. So he has to break the Avatar out himself. That's the only way to make this happen. So again, setup is pretty nice. Zhao in this episode, I think it's just unfortunate because, once again, I do think he unfortunately just ends up suffering from not being given a lot of his major scenes. They take away a lot of the stuff that makes him really, really interesting as a character. He's performed, I think, really well. It's just that you've really undercut the raw potential of the character, and as well as that, this feels like this is an arc that we should have built to much earlier, and it feels weird that we're only just getting around to the proper, like, they need to fight now, and we're right at the end of the series, whereas of course in the original, they came to blows in the episode where like Zhao was introduced, and it's just an odd change that doesn't benefit Zhao for certain as a character. So yeah, that's fine. Again, Zhao talks to Aang, and basically the main point here is just that, hey, we're not going to kill you because we don't want to have to search for the next avatar. As he leaves, of course, Aang airbends him down, and Zhao can't really respond just in case he kills Aang, and it's like, okay, it's fine. But again, it's just like, yeah, this is an okay version of Zhao, but I don't really have too much else to say. He gives a speech and it's quite impressive, and it just gets across the idea that, are they going to be on full guard here because they're celebrating here? Probably not. And so this is where we introduce the Blue Spirit. And I think it's a reasonably well done way to incorporate this episode into what's going on here. Again, it does just feel like, oh yeah, we are rushing to cram in a lot of this stuff, and this is one of those big, important, action-centric episodes that you kind of need to do, and it works okay here. It's just that, like, I just wish there was a little bit more opportunity to breathe, that whole idea. So yeah, we see Zuko sneak in under a supply cart. He eventually makes his way to Aang, frees him, and they go to escape together. In the meantime, Zhao, there's an interesting line here where he sets up the whole great sage stuff of like, make sure that he has everything that he needs for his research. And this is when he finds out that Aang is missing, and so the alarm goes off, setting up the actions kind of set piece here, which is where most of the episode happens, resulting in the giant fight where Aang and Zuko work together. Aang finds out that under the mask it is Zuko, and he saves the both of them, basically. It's pretty accurately done. I think the action is actually pretty nice in that they actually get quite ambitious with it. You'd think that this would be an episode where would they be able to do the whole sequence with the ladders and all this sort of stuff? Maybe not, but no, they actually do it, and it works out quite well. It definitely benefits from the fact that there's not a crazy amount of bending going on, because a lot of times you can just cut to Zuko with the swords doing stuff. And because it's nighttime, like, you can show Aang's airbending in kind of a slightly easier way. But still, it hits all the beats that you needed to, in terms of, like, the second Zhao is just like, we need the Avatar alive. Zuko uses this to get out, but the Yu Yan archers make the shot, of course. And, of course, the big shocking reveal of, like, Aang, who was just questioning Zuko earlier on in the episode, now discovers, like, wait, you saved me. And the questions obviously going through Aang's mind are like, what does this mean? Why has Zuko fought against his own people, basically, to get me out? What's going on here is the real question. And then we get the scene where I have some mixed feelings on. And this is obviously this idea of, like, I'll quickly cut to the next scene as well while we kind of do this, actually. We probably skip ahead a little bit, yeah. So past this, it's more this scene here. This is what they do in terms of Aang and Zuko talking in the original episode. They basically just do this, and there's not too much dialogue between them, but it says a lot by saying little. That, hey, this is one of their first times properly interacting well, the big reveal of who the Blue Spirit was, and then Aang just putting out those little kind of feelers of just like, hey, do you think maybe we could have been friends, like, if things had gone slightly differently? And they just leave on bad terms, and it's that whole idea when he returns back to his friends, they're like, did you make a friend? And Aang's just kind of like, not quite, potentially, but not actually. But in this version, they decide that actually we need to have, and I believe this is like a 5-6 minute sequence here, and this is where I just feel like it's a bit overdone. I get it, you want to have these two characters interact like a little bit more than is maybe just present in the original episode, but I don't think it accomplishes as much as it needs to, given that it's like a pretty big portion of the episode, and there's been other sections of the episode already that have really felt rushed, and they could have used a bit of an opportunity to just be a little bit more extended, just focus on the scene for a little bit longer. But no, we instead need to have Aang and Zuko really, really getting through the time here, talking about calligraphy brushes, and the journal gets brought up, which is a nice reference. I think the stuff about the journal is kind of nice. And I like that they do kind of get to talking. I do feel they maybe overthink some of this stuff in terms of like, oh, we need to point out when Aang finds out about Zuko's banishment really, really specifically. And so we have to have this whole idea of Aang bringing up stuff that directly leads into the next flashback instead of just showing us the flashback. There's a few moments of connection here that are kind of nice in terms of they both have expectations on them. And Aang points out, you don't have to be like the others. What if you go against like the way your father is and show some compassion? And this obviously enrages Zuko, and you're like, why? Compassion is a sign of weakness, and he really like gets into Aang's face here and like attacks because of this. I just think it takes up way too much time for what it accomplishes, because the scene that I pointed out earlier on, it effectively does the same thing. Like, did we actually need 2 scenes of Aang and Zuko talking and Zuko attacking Aang, but Aang defending? As in, like, I saved your life. There's just this weird sense that, to me, you either needed to replace the later scene with this scene and just have that bit, like, maybe attached onto the end. I don't really get why you felt the need to separate it into 2 different scenes. That's my kind of point here. In terms of, again, it's we want to have our cake and eat it too. We want to have what's already there, even though it accomplishes everything that our new scene is going to, but we also want to include this new scene because we want to have them interact more. And it's like, patience. Like, Aang and Zuko will get their opportunity to interact more. Like, wait for it, basically, that whole idea. But this obviously brings us into the Agni Kai scene itself. And obviously the reveal initially is that Zuko has to face his father. It's not the general. He has insulted Ozai's plans, Ozai's military. That's why this is happening in this way. Initially, Zuko does refuse to fight. I do like the benefit of, because Iroh and Ozai are like allowed to interact, you do get like Iroh stepping in, as like he is one of the few people who feels he can actually step up in front of Ozai and just say what he feels needs to be said. And it's like Ozai will dismiss Iroh, but he will never. It feels like there's a sense of he can never be super incredibly like rude and dismissive to Iroh, because there's, I think, almost underneath all of this idea of, if those two ever like were drawn into an Agni Kai, like neither knows in a way who would actually win. There's that sort of underlying things to it, of just like, he knows Iroh's more good-natured than him, so that like he can be like mean to him and dismiss what he says, but he's never going to sort of like have him punished for speaking out of turn. It's just an interesting dynamic. But yeah, we do get Zuko fighting back. Ozai kind of forces him into it in this version of it, and really demands that Zuko kind of like put more effort into the fight. We build up to this moment here where throughout the fight, it's like Ozai's kind of playing with him. He's just like one hand behind the back a few times, but then he takes out that hand and punches him every so often. And you can tell he's not going all out, but it then creates this weird moment of like, okay, Zuko finally does go all out, and it seems like he's actually able to get an attack in on Ozai. Like, if he delivered this, he would have burned Ozai in the face, but he holds back because he's like, I don't want to burn my father. And so this actually enrages Ozai even more. And this is what leads to Ozai burning him in this scene. And again, it's not just that like he does a fire blast and hits him in the face. It's no, he full on like scars him, like holding a flame up to Zuko's eye. So that's what happens there. And again, the whole idea of compassion is a sign of weakness. My issues here are just that, again, it's changes that don't feel like they're absolutely necessary. Did you need to turn this into a full-on fight? I don't think you had to. I understand you wanted Daniel Day-Kim to have something to do in terms of action in this season, when otherwise there's not really a lot going on for him. I do get that. But I do think ultimately you accomplish pretty much everything that you need to do if you just did the scene accurately to the original, as is what is done here. You can still emphasize this more than, because this isn't like, this is part of the arc in the back in the original, but it's not maybe emphasized as much as it is here. You can still do this because basically the reason Zuko doesn't even want to engage with Ozai at all is because it's out of kind of respect, kind of compassion to a certain degree. The whole reason this fight is happening is over Zuko's compassion, over defending people. You don't need to have this extra bit in on top of it, especially because this then draws in the whole idea of, wait, did Ozai give him that opening to test him? Or did Zuko earn this? And I think there's problems with either way in that sense, in terms of like, well, you know, if Zuko actually did just get this in place, then I'm like, wow, I don't like that Zuko at this age was nearly able to get the advantage over Ozai. And then Ozai just kind of toying with Zuko and he nearly gets himself burned is just a bit of a like, huh? Like, it just creates an unnecessary nuance to a scene that is ultimately quite nuanced. That like a needless, like, why is that a factor in all of this when, again, the original hits most of these beats pretty correctly. And again, because you also took out the Zhao Zuko Agni Kai, I also understand why, like, you wanted to obviously show an Agni Kai, but I'm like, just show that one. And then just do this as the character arc moment that it is. Why does this have to be an action scene extended into what it actually is here? Because it doesn't add, this specific stuff here doesn't add in as much as like you think. The added stuff comes from other scenes, and we'll get to that in basically like the next scene. But anyway, this one here is, like I said, this is pretty much the more accurate to the original show. And again, I think this gets across the main ideas. The idea that Aang saves Zuko, and one of the few things that they really say to each other is this idea of, you know, hey, I know people from the Fire Nation. I had a friend called Kuzan. If we knew each other back then, could we have been friends? And just putting it into Zuko's head that, like, this is his enemy talking about immediately being friends with him. And Zuko attacks because he feels it's what he has to do. But they both end the episode really lost in thought over this, like, encounter that, like, they could actually get on pretty well. And again, it's just a little bit affected, the effectiveness of this scene, because you had a whole, like, 5-6 minute dialogue sequence between the two in the previous scene together. G and Iroh kind of talk here. And again, just setting up the idea of, like, we're going to do the reveal now. With the big thing being like, hey, how did, do you know how you and the others were actually assigned to this mission? Because I do, and I don't think you know the full scope of this, basically. And so we get into it, and I think this is the best scene in the episode, and probably the second best scene in the entire show. And this is obviously Zuko recovering after the Agni Kai. Iroh's in there initially, but then Ozai barges his way in there, and Ozai kind of wants a bit of an explanation. And so we do get the idea, you know, your vision is going to be fine, so that's cool. Iroh tries to stop Ozai coming in, but he does just walk straight past him. And Ozai kind of worries about Zuko's spirit. It needs strengthening, that you held back. And for Ozai, it was not out of respect, it was weakness that you didn't, like, strike me when you had the opening. And that weakness needs purging. So Zuko has to give up the weak to make himself strong. He has to sacrifice people when needed, including the 41st Division. That's the point that Ozai is trying to make. Like, basically, admit that you were wrong to go against the plan. Admit that the right course of action is to sacrifice weak people. And Zuko's response is that the weak can become stronger. You just have to give them a chance. And this is a really interesting back and forth, because this is so characterful. Really, really characterful between the two, because this is a huge show of, like, strength from Zuko to actually, after being so badly injured by his father, he still kind of stands up to him in this moment and stays true to his ideals just prior to his banishment here of, like, no, I believe weak people can become stronger. Like, you just have to give them a chance. And he's referring to himself, obviously, but also like just other people in general. Don't just like judge them on outwards appearance. That division could go on to become one of the better ones if you give them an opportunity. That whole idea. And Ozai is furious about this because it's like, you need strengthening, but no, you persist on being like soft, like your mother. And it's one of the few references to Ursa in this whole thing, because we obviously don't know if they're going to maybe change up some of how this exactly works, because there have been moments where like this stuff like Ozai and loss has been brought up, and in like the earlier episodes and stuff like that, where it's like, don't talk to me about loss, as in like, Ozai, who have you lost specifically that you seem to really care about? If it plays out exactly like canon, he shouldn't be too broken up about Ursa's banishment or whatever. But are they going for the idea that actually Ozai deep down cares about Ursa, but like actually had to quote unquote sacrifice her to kind of stay true to himself or something like that? What sort of an arc are we going for here? So it makes me very interested to see what they do with Ursa, because the big one, of course, is going to be like Zuko alone next season, how they do that backstory there. So yeah, this is the whole, you're banished, you can't return until you capture the Avatar, you have to learn away from the palace, basically. And the 41st Division will be your crew, since you seem to care about them so much. That's a really cool reveal of just Ozai just throwing this weak division at him, of like, I'll just put all the weaklings together. And so this is how Zuko has his crew. That's a very, very cool reveal, because it allows you to do the storm reveal of like Zuko's backstory being revealed to the crew, creates a bond between the two of them. But now it's this extra idea of Zuko saved you from death. So which is better? This journey that we've been on together, where you've been a bit frustrated, or the fact that you would have been killed like years ago in the war. It's a really, really interesting kind of change that they did here, that only works because, of course, G and the others are younger in this version, whereas in the original, G seems like quite an experienced kind of officer and stuff like that. And so you could see his reaction to this at the end is like, he just can't believe that this is actually like the truth of the situation here. And so Zuko gets his kind of guard of honor, and again, it's the wording here of like, it's the guard of honor for their prince. They finally kind of acknowledge him in that way. But yeah, Zuko saved them all. He's welcomed back. I like Iroh's scolding of Zuko, of just like, hey, I'm not going to overly inquire about what you do, but you need to be more responsible type thing. It's a nice way to end the kind of episode on that side of things for the most part. But then we immediately go into, oh yeah, Aang's in this episode. His plot's here as well. Oh yeah, Katara and Sokka haven't been in this whole episode. It's like, oh yes, I forgot about some of the main characters, that sort of thing. So yeah, he arrives back at the Heibai statue, meditates into the spirit world. He returns the totem to Ko in exchange for Sokka, Katara, and the villagers. Have to note immediately the totem and the fact that I think they get themselves very confused here. Is the totem a physical object or a spiritual object? Because it was clearly a physical object on a shelf in a room. Aang then meditates into the spirit world via his normal method. So if he can't bring his physical body with him, how does he bring a physical object with him? And I think they get themselves incredibly confused, because they have to add in this whole I stole something from Ko plot point, and they haven't fully fleshed it out with the lore of the show. And so it creates this frustrating kind of weirdness. Now, obviously, they could create some sort of a weird backstory to this, where maybe it originally is some sort of a spiritual object taken out into the physical world, so it can actually kind of cross over, but it's needlessly kind of complicated. In the same way that, you know what else is going to be needlessly complicated? Karuk's knife, which, as we're going to see, is going to be pretty badly explained and used overall. So just a bit of a weird one, because I don't mind what actually happens here too much, except for the fact that I kind of don't like that it just takes place in silence, that Ko has no dialogue whatsoever. I would have loved to have seen Ko like say something about his mother or something like that. Not just kind of, in a way, literally giving the villagers being returned scene to Ko. Heibai basically not really referenced in the episode outside of like the location. It's just so rushed. There's such a lack of care, I think, in this scene in terms of just properly bringing the plot to a nice conclusion. Like, it's cool, friendship, he's so happy to see them again because he's had to save them, you know, do the responsible thing, go on this journey to get them back. That's great. We see the villagers reunited and stuff like that. Cool. We also have to resolve this. So it's like 4 or 5 little mini plot threads all having to be wrapped up in like one quick scene. And you can see why like nothing gets the chance to just linger. That Aang hugs Katara and Sokka, and then boom, we cut to the villagers. Boom, he's back in the spirit world trying to go see Gyatso again, but Gyatso of course is gone, and Aang realizes that it was a one-time only thing. And it's like, it's cool, it's emotional when Aang realizes this, but again, it's like, linger on it a little bit more. No, okay, we're done. And then the final scene is, of course, Zuko looking at his old self in the mirror as he goes to sleep, kind of pondering the encounter with Aang and everything that's happened. Nice kind of connection back to the whole thing, referencing like the opening scene of the episode, you know, bookmarking the episode, so that's pretty nice. But, you know, there are good moments, there are some weak moments in the episodes, but it does have to be said that the Zuko backstory, I think, just consistently throughout the episode is pretty strong. It's one of the stronger like general plots of any of these kind of individual episodes. But there are still issues. Like, there is kind of, I think, consistently across the show with just regards to like, it's great that you can write a lot of the Fire Nation characters and plots really, really well, but it's like, wow, you really didn't seem to care that much about the Aang plot in this episode because it was all so rushed. Like, it's crazy to think that this, in one episode, like we're with Shayu and the Fire Sages and we see Roku, and then we're all the way back here and this is like the reintroduction of Katara and Sokka after being gone for like an entire episode. So like they miss a whole episode of the series. It's crazy to think about that they do that. But there are some great stuff. Like, this scene is really, really well done. But even the flashback isn't perfect because I think they maybe change too much of what they're trying to do. Now, I want to make it clear, I think, going back to the actual fight of the Agni Kai, it's low-ish on complaints about like how they chose to kind of slightly adjust adaptation moments, but it still is that fundamental idea of comparing it to the original. Does showing it a little bit more add more than what was there in the original? And the answer kind of really is like, not in particular. Like, if you had just done basically the original scene, but just Ozai is no longer in shadow and you actually just show a little bit clearer what he does, he has some lines of dialogue, you hit the exact same beats that you do in this. But you felt the need that, okay, we'll do a fight scene here, we have to show an Agni Kai, but it's like, it's because you didn't show one earlier on, and that's kind of part of the problem. So just the mix of like something very well done, but then also the other side of that is that, okay, you don't have as clean of an arc on the other side of things, and you really struggle with that, it seems like. So just the mix kind of approach, but it still is one of the better episodes. So yeah, just 2 more to go. The finale here, as we go to the Northern Water Tribe. You probably know already that I think 7 is not fantastic, and 8 is at least, you know, solid. But we'll get to those 2 episodes to kind of wrap up coverage on the series. But in the comments on this one, let me know what your thoughts are on episode 6 of Netflix Avatar. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.